welcome to Steam Engine 13, coming to you from the Neville Public Museum. Steam Engine is an event series highlighting interesting topics delivered through the lens of our STEAM disciplines: science, technology, engineering, the arts, and mathematics. What I'm saying is Steam Engine is just a cool platform to showcase cool people doing cool stuff. Steam Engine is a platform for locals to just discuss their ideas. So if you have an idea that you want to see elevated and discussed, please share it with us. Head to our webpage at steamenginegb.com to share your idea with us. So all of this is made possible because of our incredible sponsors. Big thank you to all of you, starting with our title sponsor, US Venture. Fox Communities Credit Union, Northeast Wisconsin Technical College, St. Norbert College, Schneider School of Business, and University of Wisconsin-Green Bay. Big thank you to all of you. 2021 is well on its way, coming for us. We're already developing great content and we're looking for a new title sponsor. So if you, your business, your organization, your group of best friends is looking for a new project to support, consider supporting Steam Engine Green Bay. On to Steam Engine 13. The event theme is social justice. Tonight we're talking about fairness in terms of access to opportunities. These can be opportunities to wealth, education, home ownership, or just basic survival. Over the past year, the greater Green Bay area has reached a critical mass of voices discussing social justice topics. Now, although conversations about justice are hundreds of years old in our country, it is more recent that our community at large has begun to unpack the terms and the impacts of social, political, and economic mechanisms that perpetuate disparities. These disparities include gaps in education achievement, access to homeownership, equal pay, and disproportionate health outcomes. Social justice is impacted by multiple factors on multiple fronts, and the fight for it will leave lasting images for generations to come. I know all of that was a mouthful and a brainful, and that's why we have three fascinating presenters, all experts in their fields, to help us think through social justice. We've had the honor of sitting down with Angel Saavedra Cisneros, Jonathan Dunbar, and Shea Correra to discuss social justice through the work that they do. You're probably viewing from the sanctity of your own space, so feel free to laugh, cry, shout, or just sit totally stone-faced while you digest these conversations with our presenters. Hopefully you've got some questions too, and since we're in a new format and we're streaming this video on Facebook, you have the opportunity to comment and ask questions throughout the presentation. The guests will join us live after the video to answer your questions and respond to your comments. When you add a comment or ask a question, you will automatically be entered in a drawing for a free Steam Engine t-shirt, just like that, designed and printed by local Bay Area artists. So without further ado, Steam Engine 13.
Hello everybody, my name is Lucy Arndt. I'm a professor at St. Norbert College, and it's my pleasure to interview Jonathan Dunbar, whose topic is mathematics for social justice. And I want to share with you his elevator pitch for the talk. Math, he says, is about studying structures and systems so it can and should be used in our work for social justice. A little bit about Jonathan's background. He's an associate professor of mathematics at St. Norbert College, or SNC. He loves teaching undergraduate mathematics courses at all levels, and especially those that allow him to work with curious students. Recently, he's offered a course titled Applications of Contemporary Mathematics, taught through mathematical applications tied to social justice. And as an aside, my son took that course and loved it. By training, Jonathan is a non-associative algebraist. Lately, however, his interests hew closer to the intersection of mathematics and society, namely voting and redistricting. Whenever possible, he looks to incorporate undergraduates in his research projects. And you live in De Pere with your partner?
Lindsay.
Lindsay,
and two boys.
Who are?
Everett and Levon.
Because they're gonna want that shout out.
Okay,
awesome. At this point, I'm gonna start with my very first question. So Jonathan, this is really interesting to me. This social justice mathematics, where does your interest in this come from? How did this get started?
Sure, well, I definitely didn't spend much time on it in graduate school. I have many influences. I would like to give a special shout out to Dr. David Kung of St. Mary's College in Maryland, who first started a class to my knowledge, of social justice mathematics at his school, and inspired me to create a class of my own in that field. So as an educator, I sometimes ask my students to tell me about their mathematical experience, give me their mathematical autobiography. And I guess I don't know how surprised I am to find that not a lot of good history is going on there for many of these students. They have a lot of bad experiences. Often I find this is the case with my female students and students of color. There are stories of being ignored in the mathematics classroom, but also of being told that they just didn't belong, that math is not for them.
Right.
And so I end up hearing them say things like, I am not a math person, which bothers me in many ways. For one, I think that everyone is a math person because it's about seeing patterns. And in particular, one of my favorite definitions of mathematics is from Dr. Francis Su, who says that math is the science of patterns and the art of engaging meaningfully with those patterns. And so I appreciate that a lot because I think that this informs me on how I should use math to approach interactions within society. Because we're all part of society. Society is built on patterns. There are patterns in society, and we should engage meaningfully with those. Otherwise, someone who would try to subvert justice or cause injustice will engage with them instead.
Awesome. I think a lot of people, just as you say, oh, they think, oh, I'm not any good at math.
Sure.
So maybe even as they look at this topic and they think, oh, I won't be able to use that to think about social justice. I mean, does a person have to have taken like advanced math?
I think not. I think one of the first ways to engage with mathematics is through proportions. It's possibly one of the most meaningful tools in the intersection of math and society. And so this starts with us being informed about what is happening, what phenomena are happening in society. So we can look at charts like this. And by the way, math is also very good at helping us communicate ideas in graphs like this. So the United States has 4% of the world's population. We also have, coincidentally, 20% of the world's incarcerated people, 20% of the world's COVID cases, and about 20% of the world's COVID deaths. Now, those numbers are all coincidence, but it's strange to see how disproportionate those things arise within our society, whereas we think, that U.S. is number one on top of everything, but there are a lot of places where we're falling behind.
So just to be really clear, if this were proportionate, we'd have 4% of the world's population and maybe about 4% of the world's COVID
Roughly.
cases, give or take. Yeah? Okay.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
We might expect that if this disease was infecting people randomly across the world at a uniform rate, that it would also infect 4% of the population.
Yeah.
The U.S. would be 4% of the infections.
Okay. So there's something going on.
One would think.
That's what that suggests, yeah. Okay.
Now, one question that we can look from here is, okay, now once we have the information, where do we take that? What do we do with that? And so one example that we can look at is something like traffic stops. So here is a display of the amount of the traffic stops where there were searches of cars in Austin, Texas, between January and June of 2015. So just a glance in time, okay? Of these, roughly over 1,000 searches, about 556 were of cars that were driven by a Hispanic driver. Okay, so you see those there in green. What I want to show here is we're between January and June 2015 in Austin, Texas. There were about 1,100 searches of cars by the Austin Police Department. Of those cars, they searched 556 Hispanic drivers' cars. Now, when they do this so that they can find some contraband, right? And so 40 of those yielded discoveries. And so, unfortunately, they call this their hit rate. But the point is, when they look at the 40 discoveries that we see, we can see this within context with this picture. But this is not usually how the information is presented to us. So usually we're only given the microcosm picture, the zoomed in version, right? And if we look at this, then we see, okay, well, of the discoveries, 55% were with Hispanic drivers. So one policy that could be presented is, well, we're having 55% of all of our discoveries with Hispanic drivers, so let's stop and search Hispanic drivers even more. All right, now, I want to stress that I am not saying that the Austin Police Department did this. In fact, I argue that they didn't. Instead, they actually gave us this data. The only reason why I can look at this data is because APD actually published this data, and a shout out to the Stanford Open Policing Project, who has a database of information from several different jurisdictions. So the problem with that is we should really be looking at the discovery rate within subpopulations versus as a whole. And if we do that, we can see that out of all drivers, there's about a 3.5% discovery rate if we just looked at discovery rate among all drivers. If we look at just taking it out of the population of Hispanic drivers, it's almost a 4% discovery rate, but this is not a statistically significant difference.
Okay.
And we might, in fact, think about reasons why it is higher. One reason is because the search rate for Hispanic drivers is statistically significantly higher. We see that the search rate overall for stopped drivers is about 2% of all drivers that are stopped or searched, whereas with Hispanic drivers, it ends up being a little closer to 3.5% of all Hispanic drivers are searched.
Okay.
And so, to be fair, in 2018, the Austin Police Department published a report where they go over these disparities and they talk about the various different policies that they're setting forth to try to change things, including implicit bias training, and my favorite, working with communities to enact policy changes. I think that that's vital. But unfortunately, despite these efforts, as the Chief of Police says here, the disparities have persisted. But if we don't recognize that these disparities are happening, we can't continue to attempt to address the issue. So it's at least good that they've tried
Well,
something.
the solution starts with, first of all, looking at the data, right?
Sure, absolutely.
Seeing what the data say, and then trying different things and seeing, again, what do the data say?
And I'll say that this is very mathematical. I tell my students every day, we have a lot of techniques we can use here, right? You're going to try one and you're going to hit a wall. You got to try another one, right? And so maybe implicit bias training isn't working, or maybe implicit bias training plus other actions might actually solve the disparities.
But clearly, they're interested in trying to figure out how to solve the problem.
And that's a good thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Gerrymandering. So I think a lot of people have heard about this. We've certainly seen the signs that say, I'm trying to remember exactly, Wisconsin deserves fair maps, I think is what the signs say. So I'm excited that you're going to be talking about this. Tell us all about this gerrymandering stuff.
Well, it turns out that the redistricting process as a whole is actually very mathematical. And so you can see here an example of how a state, which I'm calling state XY, could be 25% red voters and 75% blue voters. And in fact, here we see that the red voters are not just a quarter of the population, but they're also a compact population, right? They're all kind of living in the same area. Now, if this state were to earn, because of population, because of apportionment with the census process, if they were to earn 5 districts, which means 5 representatives in Congress, then we might expect that at 25% of the population, red voters could have a representative. But it's possible to draw the lines in a way that they have 0 of the representatives. And so this is an issue because that group's voting power is seriously diminished. Now there's lots of different types of gerrymandering. There's racial gerrymandering, which the Supreme Court has weighed in on in several cases. The one that I'm focusing on right now is partisan gerrymandering, where we look at specifically party affiliations and trying to suppress the votes of different parties or whatever the out party happens to be. So one way I do this is I like to look at the relationship between the percentage of votes and the percentage of seats that a certain party wins within a state. And I think that given a district map or a proposed district map for a state, we can model the relationship using historical data, voting data for different precincts throughout the state, and look at what proportion of the seats the party should win if they win a certain proportion of the votes. So you can see here we have what's called proportional representation, where you get exactly the proportion of the seats relative to the proportion of the votes that you earn. So if you get 50% of the votes, you get 50% of the seats. If you get 20% of the votes, you get 20% of the seats.
Which is what I think most people imagine happens.
Well,
right?
Which might be, but the Supreme Court has actually weighed in on this, and they said that this is not necessarily the goal. And the reason why is it might lead to something like you apportion 8 representatives to a state like Wisconsin, and then you don't even need district lines anymore. You just don't draw the lines and you say, okay, well, the population votes to be, you know, I don't know, a quarter red and 3/4 blue, whatever it is. And so we take that 8 and we give 3/4 of them. So 6 of them are for the blue party and 2 of them are for the red party. And the problem is that while this might sound nice, maybe everybody gets represented the same way, they're all going to come from Milwaukee, right? Because that's where the largest population is. And so then people in Superior don't get true representation for needs that they might have, which might actually cross party lines.
Sure, right? Makes sense.
So this might not be the goal, but it does represent a kind of idealistic benchmark that we can measure against. Typically, these what we call SV curves or seats votes curves would look something more like this S curve here. Okay. And you see that this is still a symmetric curve. If you look at this, you see that the party that receives 40% of the vote will maybe receive 20–15% of the seats, but that works the other way too. If they earn 60% of the votes, then then the other party will win 15 or 20% of the seats, and party X here will win 80 or 85, whichever. So this we would call partisanly symmetric, right? You also notice here that the areas between the 45-degree angle line and the purple curve here are equal with the above and below. They would balance each other out, right? So let's look then at a biased curve. So if a district lines are drawn in a way that's biased, we might see a relationship that looks like this, where if we go as far as 60% of the votes for party X, we see that they might even only earn 45% of the seats, right? Now what that means is that the other party is winning 40% of the votes and getting 55% of the seats, right? So this would be clearly biased against party X. And you can see that the areas above and below, if we give negative area to below that 45-degree line, positive area to the area above, then this would balance out to be a negative number, which could enable us to have a score where we could actually measure a district map and say, okay, well, if it comes out in a negative score, that means it's biased against this party. If it's a positive score, it's biased in favor of the party. And so here would be another example of a curve where we could take historical data and see if the district lines would yield this model, and then look at the areas between, and we'd see a very positive number come out of it, because the area above is way outweighing the area below. And so we don't really want this either. We would want it to treat both parties equally. And so we would hope to get back to that purple curve. And then we could, whenever district maps are proposed, we could look at those proposals and see whether there's a bias towards one party or the other.
Perfect. So let's bring it home.
Okay.
Tell me how this relates to social justice.
Well, what's happening here is that you are decreasing the voting power of certain groups. Being engaged in society, well, voting is one of the most important ways to do it, right? You get to choose your quote-unquote leaders. You get to choose those who set policy in your neighborhood, in your city. And if your vote doesn't count as much as someone on the other side of the state, then that's a big deal. And I think that that's absolutely a social justice issue.
Perfect. Thank you so much. This has been so interesting, and I'm sure people very much appreciate it. Thanks, Jonathan.